All right, so we're going to talk about programming for a gym, running group classes. So each of us has some experience doing this. I've owned a gym for a while now, right? It's been kind of a long time. Jon has owned a gym for a few years. Luke has actually written programming for a few different facilities while coaching there. So we all have some experience trying to write a program for a large group of people who may have different goals, may have different backgrounds, for a diverse coaching staff that may have different levels of buy-in, levels of knowledge about programming, and members who may or may not understand what you're trying to accomplish with programming. So there's a lot of challenges in terms of writing programming for group class situations. So we're going to do a few episodes on this because there's a lot that we can get into, but we're just going to start with a discussion on some of the different trade-offs that are kind of inherent in programming for a group class facility, right? So when we talk about programming on this podcast, a lot of the time we're talking about writing training maybe for athletes with a somewhat more competitive goal. Maybe we're talking about writing training for someone who was a serious athlete and has kind of backed off a little bit, but we're talking about generally people who understand roughly what they're shooting for, who have a certain level of buy-in since they hired, us or whoever we're talking about as a coach. And, that kind of like totally changes the game. If someone has something that they're specifically shooting for and at least generally trusts what they're doing, right? A lot of these problems sort of go away, but when you're writing programming for a group class, those are not necessarily part of the equation, right? You have people who have their own opinions about what the training should look like. Maybe they were at a gym before yours that they like more, and they're like, well, at my old gym, we used to do it this way. Right. And they have all these opinions that you may or may not even understand kind of exist in the background. And that can make things challenging. So I think that when I think about this stuff, one of the biggest trade-offs for writing programming for a group class compared to writing programming for an individual is finding the right balance between what people want and what they need. Right? Because a lot of people who come into a gym that's a CrossFit gym, a gym that's a former CrossFit gym, a gym that's some sort of functional fitness, strength and conditioning, whatever gym, is that you have people who are looking to do a hard workout, right? That a big selling point for them is that they've trained hard in the past, or they appreciate the challenge of coming in and doing something difficult, or they think that they need to do hard stuff in order to achieve results. So generally people want hard things, right? But what they need may not be hard stuff all the time, right? What they need may be relatively consistent attendance, some aerobic work with maybe a little bit of challenging stuff, and like a lot of farmers walks and side planks, right? But they're like, yeah, that's cool. That's not hard enough. I'm here to get my butt kicked every day, right? So I think that the trade-off between what people want and what they need is one of the most difficult things to balance. And we can sort of get into, how we think about balancing those things in actual X's and O's and programs written on the whiteboard or whatever. But I think it might be useful to start with thinking about what are these different trade-offs that we're even considering, and then maybe we can zoom in on those either today or in one of these future episodes. So, Jon, what are some other trade-offs that you see in writing group class programming?
Outside of what people need and what they want, I think one of the biggest ones is logistically how it works. You think of an ideal program for someone in terms of the variation of things they're going to be doing. But in a group class, you have to think, okay, do we have enough equipment for everyone to do this? Do we have the space to lay this out for everyone? Do we have the time to get through this today? Do we have the time to coach a different range of abilities through this? If there's a ring muscle up workout programmed, are we going to have to spend 10 minutes working on technique with people who don't have ring muscle ups for them to be able to do the scale variation or whatever it is? So I think logistically, planning out a program is tough. And then when you throw in the fact that, not people aren't there every day. So as much as you're programming it for someone being there every day, if someone comes Monday, Wednesday, Friday, they might have done no upper body pushing all week, or however that balances out with the program. Often at my gym we have 7 ropes hanging from the ceiling. So we don't do rope climbs in group classes unless it's part of an EMOM where people can be sharing equipment or doing different stations, or a partner workout.
And sorry to interrupt, but 7 ropes is actually a lot. I think that most gyms probably do not have 7 ropes.
Yeah, right. I'd love to do more sled pushes and carries and things like that. But if you have a class of 16 people, well, we have 5 sleds, and we don't have the space to accommodate 16 people doing sled pushes, even if we had the equipment to make it work. So I don't think you're ever going to hit an optimized program for an individual. Regardless of anything else, simply from a logistics standpoint, I don't think you can optimize a program for a group class because of the space and equipment restrictions you have.
And John, to that point as well, I think that there's also a lot of variation throughout the day, right? That most gyms probably have 1 to 3 classes that are slammed, and then the other classes have far fewer people, right? I know we run into that in downtown Chicago, where 6 a.m. and 5:30 p.m. are absolute chaos almost every day, right? Because those are the times right before work and right after work when people want to get into the gym, right? And the 3:30 class, very consistently the same 8 to 10 people, right? And it's like you can do a lot more with 8 people than you can at 5:30 when there's potentially 20 something people in a class and then an additional 10 other people doing either open gym or onboarding sessions or whatever. And so that constrains how you have to think about stuff too, where you're like, oh yeah, this would totally work in this 3:30 class, but then you're like, yeah, but there's 33 people in the gym at 5:30. It's not going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, yesterday our 6:15 had 16 people in and was full. The 7:15 had 1 person. And it's like, you can't account for it being a lower than maximum capacity number. You don't get that option.
So yeah, I think that the logistics is a big one. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Luke. I think you're lagging.
Yeah, I think definitely this connection is not super strong. But I was going to say that one of the things I've ran into as a challenge, and probably the biggest challenge, is what the sort of the goal of the gym is, and the sort of the general atmosphere and the general vibe of the gym, and what do they value? Because you could have one that is very much but we value the training, that's the priority. We want to make sure that what we're doing is effective, and we have a goal in mind that we're trying to get. Most gyms will say that their goal is maybe the CrossFit Open, and then you have some other gyms where the atmosphere is more around enjoyment, it's more around people having fun and letting the client sort of essentially lead the direction that the gym goes in terms of programming. And most of the time that involves hard CrossFit done multiple times a week, and sore bodies all the time, because that's what people sort of see, or that's how they value the merit of a workout, is by how sore they get at the end of it. And one of the interesting things that can happen is that you can have an owner of a gym or coaches in a gym who feel a certain way, and they have like a certain point of view and ethos around training and what the gym's trying to provide, but then maybe the membership is actually pulling it in a different way, or vice versa. Maybe you have a gym that's trying to focus a lot more on the enjoyment factor, but then you have like a bunch of training nerds who turn up to classes and they actually want to go through progressions and they actually want to be improving in some sense. So I think that having a balance is really, really important, and just sort of understanding, okay, what it is that gym wants to be doing. And then as well as that, a program is obviously only as effective as how it's administered. And one of the things I've ran into trouble sometimes is, and I've programmed for other gyms that I've not worked in, and also gyms where the coaches don't speak English, and there's been some level of translation. So by the time the program is on the gym floor, it's actually gone through several different coaches' heads, been translated, and sometimes I remember that like whatever the finished product was on the gym floor was just nothing like what I actually imagined when I was writing it down. And that's probably going to be, I think, one of the biggest challenges, especially for people who are outsourcing programming, is just sort of like, okay, well, where's the general vision of the gym? What is it that's actually trying to be done on a bit more of a macro level, and understanding that the programming is part of that. It doesn't necessarily, if you're there to sort of provide some level of enjoyment with the individuals coming in to train, it doesn't mean you have to do really hard CrossFit all the time. But I would say that that's where sometimes maybe more of a CrossFit.com style approach to programming, where it's like the 30,000 foot view is that people are getting fitter and that they're hitting these different movement patterns every couple of weeks, and maybe they're pulling 2 days in a row, but they're doing one with, say, 75, 55 pounds, and they're doing the other one with 275 pounds and 205 pounds, and then they're saying, okay, well, that's the variation. But I think that you've got to try to make sure that if you have your own sort of style and approach to programming, that is very much in line with what the gym's vision is as well.
Yeah, Luke, one of the things I did want to touch on, which you started to mention, is that your program is going to be passed through multiple different coaches with multiple different backgrounds as well, right? So something that I certainly remember realizing, right, is that at some point when myself and one of my business partners were doing the vast majority of the coaching, we could get away with a lot more in programming because there was a lot of trust from members in us, right? Because they know that we're the owners of the business and they at least sort of respect our opinion. And if there's really only 2, maybe 3 or 4 people who are all coaching and they're handling just about everything, that the potential for that kind of miscommunication and stuff being filtered through different backgrounds or understandings there's just much less opportunity for error, right? But once you have a relatively large coaching staff, and maybe the programmer or the owner or whoever isn't doing as much of the coaching, you can really start to run into some of those the Simpsons situation, right, where they play the game of telephone. You guys remember this clip, right? That I don't remember what the initial word is, but that at the end, they've added purple monkey dishwasher to the end of whatever is being passed from person to person as they say it, right? Where it's okay, after it passes through a certain number of people, you're going to end up with some weird stuff kind of going on, right? And some of that I think can just be having good management practices with coaches, making sure you have staff meetings where you explain stuff. But even with that, you're still going to end up with problems, right? I certainly know that at South Loop, we do still have issues where sometimes someone comes in and sees what's happening in a class and it's what the hell is everyone doing? Right. And it's oh, I didn't know what that exercise was. And it's dude, there's a fucking YouTube video in the programming right next to it. Just watch the video for 15 seconds rather than just making something up. What planet are you on? Right. But it happens. And so, being aware that what you think may be clear, that you may think that you've put in a bunch of training notes, that you may think that you've linked YouTube videos to how all the stuff goes. It's hey, I have to be ahead of the ways that someone might screw this up, right? How is a member going to misinterpret this? How is a coach going to misinterpret this? Does a coach have to get a lot of buy-in from potentially 20 people who may be willing to push back and argue, right? We have to think about that. We have to think about the fact that, our early morning class has a core group, and, some of them may even be listening to this, of highly neurotic members who have a lot of experience. They actually know what they're doing to a reasonable level, but don't have a good idea of what they don't know, right? So it's they know enough and are sort of forceful enough personalities that they'll argue with coaches, push back, and they know enough that they're at least kind of right, but they don't realize that they actually are missing the point a lot of the time, right? And if a coach isn't prepared to just stand up to that and shut them down, right? The class can actually sort of take over and then cause the entire class to do something wrong because they think they know what they're doing. So you have to think about, how can this be misinterpreted? And can I take away as many opportunities for people to screw up or argue or push back or do the wrong exercise, or set it up in a way where if they do, it's really not that big of a deal.
And I think this also comes back around to that, what do people want versus what do they need? Because a lot of people will have that in their mind of, oh, we haven't done much heavy work this week. I want to lift heavy. And it's like, well, there's a reason for this. Like the way we had this in, it might not have been our last cycle, but the cycle before potentially, where we were ramping up intensity and weight across the cycle. So the first couple of weeks of workouts didn't really have any heavy barbell in. And I had a couple of people like message me and were like, hey, we just did like row intervals today. Like I want to do more than that. And I'm like, I get that, but there's a reason. Like we're not doing heavy barbell every day in a workout. Like we're building this across a cycle, and the volume and intensity of the cycle is designed around, you know, this week being less loaded, and, you know, we're trying to progress you on different things. So I think that again, coming back to that, what do they want versus what do they need? And it's difficult to placate people about that, and it's difficult to keep them happy because they think they know what they need to do. And I mean, not to say they're wrong every time, but they're wrong every time. So
they're not allowed to have an opinion. It's as simple as that. They shouldn't have an opinion.
They can have an opinion if they keep it to themselves.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that with oh, go ahead, Luke.
I was just going to say that when you're programming for, say, an individual, you know, you got essentially two people looking at it. You got the coach who writes it out, and then you've got the individual who does it. So you have two opinions on it. But then you think of programming for a facility. It's like you have obviously the gym's the sort of ownership of the gym. You have the programmer, you have coaches, you have all of the members, and it's just, yeah, sometimes it can be a bit of a battle, which is hard to win sometimes. And one of the things I've found as well is that in gyms that I've done programming for or been part of, where it's not been a super great situation, is that the programming tends to get the brunt of criticism as well. It's something that's quite easy just to be like, okay, well, this is a problem with what's going on, and it could just be the fact that like a lot of coaches in that facility aren't actually bought into what they're doing as a job, and a lot of other issues can be actually going on. Conversely to that, like I've actually seen people try to use programming as a way of like creating a fix almost, or just like trying to create hype about stuff when, try to build up excitement and things like that in the gym when there's some issues that actually need to get taken care of on a bit more of a macro scale. But it's always going to be impossible to please every gym member. And I think that part of programming, and this is where I think I've used, say, more of a traditional structure in programming, making people sort of see week-to-week progressions and stuff like that. Sometimes it can be actually really helpful because it just educates people on stuff. And sometimes if you have a little bit more of a random style of programming, it can be difficult to educate people about it. And then they're more likely to sort of give you kickback if they see stuff like tempo or different exercises or like a different structure of movements and that type of stuff. So sometimes I think programming is also a bit of an education thing as well. And I think it's important to educate the members about what's going on, even if it's just, a bit of notes to go along with the programming, because that can sometimes really help with communicating ideas across.
Yeah, one thing we do is at the start of our training cycle, our head coach who writes the program, he does a short YouTube video and sends it out to all the members. So it's kind of laying out the general template of what people can expect to see each day, what the focus of the cycle is, and like what they're supposed to be getting out of it. And I think that just kind of helps people understand a little bit about where it's coming from. Often if people ask me questions about it on a one-on-one basis, I'm happy to get into like depth on things. But for most people, I think it's not even that they need to know, it's that they like having the information, whether they do anything with it or not. They like to be kept informed of stuff. But yeah, I mean, that video is literally like a 4-minute video where it's like, okay, we're doing this strength focus on a Monday, this strength focus on a Tuesday, and what are we hoping to get out of it across the cycle? What can you expect to see from your conditioning pieces? each day? What is the overall goal of the conditioning across this cycle and things like that?
Yeah, I think that that's super valuable related to what we were talking about before, which is just, building trust with people that they think that there is a plan that, they may have in their head this idea of like, well, you know what, at my old gym, we used to deadlift every Tuesday and I feel like my deadlift isn't strong enough recently. So I really think we should be deadlifting on Tuesdays. Why don't we deadlift on Tuesday? Right? Like it's like this thing that's kind of going in their head every Tuesday when they're not deadlifting. They're like, I should really be deadlifting on Tuesday. Right. And if you just have a video or some training notes that's like, hey, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it, they may still think that they should deadlift on Tuesdays. And maybe they're right, but they're at least like, okay, there's like a reason we're doing this. There's a plan. I may want to deadlift on Tuesday and maybe I will do that in an open gym or something like that. But I can at least roughly buy into the idea that like this has been thought through. And then, I can decide whether I'm going to participate or not, which I think is just like, it's just a huge difference in terms of the dynamic of how people relate to the programming. If they think there's a plan, if they have some general trust that it has been thought through, compared to like Luke said, if the vibe from the coaches is kind of like checked out, if they feel like the gym is disorganized, whatever, then an easy thing that everyone can quickly have an opinion on is the programming, right? Like, why are we doing pull-ups again? We just did pull-ups. We never run. Our workouts are too long. My old gym used to do intervals. We do too much accessory work. Why don't we ever do accessory work? We're not doing enough strength work. I feel like I never snatch, right? That everyone
when
has
are we
thoughts
do
like
Murph?
that. And if they're, yeah, right. When are we doing Murph again? Right. Everyone has thoughts like that. And as soon as they're upset about other stuff, they can just start pulling them out. And it's just like, I'm generally mad and I'm not even necessarily sure why. I'm just getting overall bad vibes. But like, what can I complain about? Oh, too much squatting this week. I'm upset,
What do you think are some of the things you guys have? This lag is anyway. What are some of the things that you guys have done a 180 on in terms of your program or programming for affiliates? Because one of the things I know is that programming for an individual in a sport is a lot easier because you have certain things you're working towards and you have information in front of you, which is very like it's there. This individual needs to do more of this. To sort of go down one level, I found it quite difficult when I was writing a general competitors program because it was like, who's this for? And then to even go down a further level, now you're writing a sort of more general population program for gym members. And obviously you can think of a couple of people and have a few people in mind when you are writing programming and stuff like that. But sometimes it's just open up to a lot more, okay, well, maybe this will work or maybe this won't work. But yeah, what are some of the things that you guys have maybe done a 180 on or have sort of changed your opinion on?
One thing for me has been sometimes cutting down on the volume. And, I used to be more of a trying to fit more into class. And not to say that I'm more towards a .com perspective, but I've more recently tried to switch into a thinking of, okay, do we have enough time to actually coach people on this? Do we have enough time to work on technique with people? One thing we just introduced in our last cycle was what we call primers, which each day before the strength piece, there is a technique piece that's directly related to the strength and is part of more of an extended warm-up, but gives us a chance to work on some technique. So when we were doing clean and jerks in the last cycle, we did things like jerk balances and things like that as our primer, where, hey, we're able to hit some technique. We'll do a little bit of positional coaching. It's part of the warm-up. It's not a sort of a breakdown of we're just working on this for the next 5 minutes. But I think going away from that, how much can we fit in to, are we having enough time to coach people here? And trying to lower the volume to improve the quality of coaching that people are getting in class.
Yeah, John, I think that's very insightful, right? That a lot of the value in coming to a class is receiving coaching. And if you are just like, okay, here's A1, A2, B1, B2, C, and then a finisher, right? Yo, guess what's happening during class? Like nothing other than the coach being like, all right, guys, we have 1 minute. Like, get your boxes. What are you guys doing? Right. And that's not necessarily the best experience as far as coaching. To kind of answer your question, Luke, it's hard for me to say, oh, this is something I've done a 180 on, in the sense that I think that coaching and programming in group classes is very much like an iterative empirical process, right? You have an idea of what you want to happen, and then you start trying it and you realize what problems pop up, right? That you're like, okay, what are we generally trying to accomplish here? Well, we would like people to show up with some consistency, right? That's one of the most important things. I don't necessarily care exactly what they're doing, but if they're showing up 3, 4, 2, 5, whatever, like times per week with consistency over several months, they're probably going to have some sort of good result, right? If we want them to show up consistently, what do we need to happen? We need them to stay safe, right? We don't want them to develop overuse injuries. We don't want them to develop any sort of acute injury, obviously. And we want them to be having enough fun that they are enticed to actually come into the gym, right? Sort of like we talked about before, we want to avoid just general logistical problems, whether that's there's too much equipment, the programming is too confusing, or there's an opportunity for a coach to make errors in terms of how they're interpreting stuff, or an opportunity for members to like argue or push back or create, dissension amongst the class. So, those are kind of like the big picture ways that I'm thinking about this. And, as far as like doing a 180, it's hard to say, oh, I've like definitely pivoted on this. But I do think that, sort of like you were saying, a lot of the ideas you have about what people should be doing and how things should work and what coaches should be able to do, or how much members should understand the point of doing some certain type of progression, you very quickly realize which of those things are just completely false. And then you have to figure out like, okay, how much do I just sort of like give in to the demands of people and just give them hard shit every day and let them figure it out? And how much do I say, you know what? Like, I actually think that people should be doing rear foot elevated split squats, but they get mad and argue when they do it every Tuesday in like a structured way. Can we balance the goal of having them do accessory work with their desire to feel like they're doing different stuff and being challenged? And like, probably in future episodes, we'll get into how we sort of like, or how at least we at Southwood try to thread that needle. But that is a lot of what we think about, right? It's like, okay, this is the outcome that we want. We tried this specific thing. It caused logistical problems. Members complained. Coaches got a lot of pushback. Awesome. Let's take the idea of what we were trying to accomplish and then try it in a slightly different way to see if we can get folks to buy in and actually execute what we want them to do in a way that keeps them coming back and having fun.